Welcome and thank you for joining SailPoint's webinar, The 5 Myths of Identity Governance. I'm Kirby Orozco and I will be your moderator for today. Before we start, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. All participants will be placed on mute during the presentation. Please submit any questions that you may have in the Q&A panel and we will answer them during our Q&A session at the end of the presentation. This session will be recorded and we will email you a link of the recorded version after the event. Presenting today is Jacqueline Brinkerhoff, who is the Director of Product Marketing at SailPoint. Jacqueline is the Senior Director of Product Marketing. She possesses over 28 years of high-tech experience in IT management, business productivity, data management, backup and recovery, and cybersecurity, driving global products and go-to-market strategies across a wide variety of industries. With that, I'll hand it over to her to start our presentation.
Thank you, Kirby, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. If you look across the globe, you'll notice how technology has been quickly evolving the face and shape of every organization, and this also includes how business is now being transacted. This evolution has been taking place in organizations of all sizes, and it's referred to as the digital transformation, which is something you may be very familiar with. This digital transformation has been and continues to be a journey for these organizations. And what is it that they're transforming? Well, it depends on the organization. But fundamentally, it involves a radical rethinking of how an organization uses technology, its people, and processes. This is accomplished with a foundational change that includes moving towards cloud, whether it's adopting cloud file storage, or applications, or it could even include moving their legacy data centers to a cloud infrastructure such as AWS. And why are they undergoing such a change? Well, the bottom line is they're wanting to improve their performance as well as become more agile. And they're wanting to gain greater reach for their business to help drive growth. And finally, it's about being competitive, staying relevant, and most importantly, it's about winning. In fact, digital transformation is so important to organizations, they're actually making it one of their top budget spends this year. IDC predicts that $2 trillion, that's with a T, will be spent on digital transformation efforts alone. And this represents almost half an organization's tech budget spent. And while this transformation can open doors to new opportunities, we've seen how it can also create complexity for an organization. The person that can probably feel and empathize with this the most is your CIO. Executives we speak with tell us that on top of the long list of issues and challenges that they have to deal with on a daily basis, they're also now on the hook to ensure all business is transacted in a compliant manner, and more importantly, be able to prove and demonstrate compliance if and when auditors come knocking on their doors. And implementing a strong internal control framework and being able to report against it helps ensure that they can stay compliant to their respective industry regulations, such as SOX, HIPAA, GLBA, and GDPR, to name more than just a few. In addition, CIOs must protect an organization's data. This is data that is used to transact business, data that includes customer information or even vital trade secrets. This data can then be stored or is stored in applications and file folders and pretty much accessed by everyone. And in order to protect this data, it's necessary to understand and control who has access to it and what they will actually do with it without impeding productivity. And finally, the age-old ask of do more with less still has not gone away. And CIOs are challenged to find ways to leverage operational expenses rather than burdening balance sheets with CapEx expenditures. In addition, they must consider how digitization and transformation can actually accelerate the delivery of services to their customers. And finally, they're always focused on reducing IT costs while enabling improved productivity for workers. The good news is that there are CIOs who have figured out how to get that sleep they need and actually successfully navigate their digital transformation journey. And the way that they do that is through the use of identity governance. However, through our conversation with other executives who may not be sleeping so well yet, we found that there are some misconceptions around identity governance that still has been creating some confusion and may be keeping some from understanding the role that it can really play so you can successfully move through your change. Now, myths are funny because if you stop and think about it, they started somewhere. And then those stories then became so-called truths, which people then believe, and those truths or beliefs then go on to possibly impact their behavior and decisions. A simple example of this, when I was thinking back, a simple example was, if you remember way back before seedless watermelons were mainstream, I remember being a child and being so excited, because I love watermelon, to be handed a big, ripe, juicy slice of watermelon. And just before I bit into it, my mother said, "Now, Jackie, make sure you don't swallow those seeds, because if you do, they'll plant in your stomach, and then you'll end up growing a really big watermelon in your belly." My excitement immediately turned from fear, my excitement then turned to fear and uncertainty. And, you know, all the thoughts as a little child, like, oh my gosh, what if I miss a seed? What if a watermelon grows in my stomach? And all these worries went through my head. And as we all hopefully know, this is not true and not fact. And if you didn't know that by now, well, now you do, and you are welcome, and you may continue eating your watermelon. But let's now turn to the myths centered around identity governance. So our first myth has to do with identity governance only being something IT is concerned about and gets to deal with. Now, in the past, it was common for organizations to give responsibility for identity governance to the IT department. But now, granted, identity governance has evolved over time, and what used to be an IT tool to help with basic IT-related tasks, such as automating provisioning, for instance, then evolved into a vital component to help ensure access was compliant. However, business application owners were not held accountable for compliance with internal controls, even though they understood how the systems were being used and which employees needed access to applications and data. And as a result, IT shouldered responsibility for a set of risks that were really business risks. So here's what we know today. The business side of the house must assume some, if not all, ownership for identity governance. Business owners and managers are best qualified to define and enforce policies and controls that minimize those access risks. And IT staff can support and assist these efforts, but they can't own the process. Our next myth is the belief that identity governance and security are two separate efforts. According to an April 2018 Ponymon report, when it comes to data breaches, the negligent user, or otherwise known as, quote, insider, is the biggest cause of an incident. Specifically, it's often due to a careless employee or contractor being the root cause. Less an occurrence, but just as concerning, are the other statistics that show that almost a fourth of breaches involve some type of criminal intent. And when I mention insider, you may think that may represent your employees or contractors, but it's actually more than that. You see, enterprises not only have employees and contractors, but they also are working with suppliers and partners, as well as software bots now, who require access to corporate data in order to collaborate and to be able to perform their job successfully. In addition, those users are now needing access to more and more systems, more applications and data than ever before. And many of them are all interconnected. And really what ties all this together is identity. And as a result, hackers have a new preferred attack vector. And it's not the network anymore, but it's rather your users or insiders. And this is because people and bots are far easier to crack than a 512-bit hash. At any enterprise organization, the number of entry points for a hacker or exposure points are as large as the number of users you let onto your system. So rather than thinking identity and security are separate, you can actually see them as one. If we boil down the fundamental aspects of mitigating the risk of a breach, it basically comes down to access. Identity enables organizations to be able to have a 360-degree view of everyone's access to each and every application, every system, and file store. And by utilizing identity governance, organizations can also know what users are actually doing with their access. And as job roles and functions change, access can be appropriately adjusted or completely removed in the case of an employee termination, for instance. Our next myth is one that I hear very often, and that's the idea that identity governance is designed for the large companies, the large enterprise, which may have been true about 10 years ago. But today in our modern world of digitalization, enterprise companies of all sizes experience fundamentally the same challenges as the large companies do. If you peer into today's modern enterprise organization, you will see that identity is consumed and leveraged across a wide spectrum of enterprises that range in size and industry focus. And that's because identity is a key component to ensuring access to data, no matter where it resides. You've got to make sure that it's also well protected. But identity is not only used for security reasons. Enterprise organizations are now all subject to one or more compliance regulations that requires them to implement and enforce access policies, and also have a way to document and prove that compliance. So not only is every executive worried about digital transformation, but now they have to worry about these privacy laws and these regulations that are making the issue that much more challenging. SOC, FISMA, PCI, and the growing wave of data privacy laws, notably GDPR, for instance, and then we also are seeing more localized in the states in the US, for instance, California, New York, and others around the world are now implementing specific data privacy laws, as well as with new countries, as I mentioned, all coming online and adding to the list here. The thing about compliance is that it does not discriminate. Enterprise organizations of all sizes are subject to compliance. SOX or any regulation that they may have an audit deficiency, or an enterprise may have worse, a material deficiency, will create a nightmare for the board, the CEO, the CFO, and the CIO, and again, that leads to more sleepless nights. Organizations today are implementing compliance programs, but that doesn't come without a price tag. Ponymon reports that organizations are spending roughly $5.5 million on compliance, which includes the staffing, the technology, and the audits required. And that may sound like a lot, but when you compare that to the cost of being found out of compliance, it doesn't really seem like that much after all. And finally, if you look across various industries, it's not uncommon to see ongoing merger and acquisition activity happening, and that's impacting organizations of all sizes. Many of our customers are large, and even more are mid-size. But for all of those active in the merger and acquisition front, being able to bring on board thousands of new employees in one single day and have them enabled on key applications so that way they can perform their job is a Herculean task, unlikely to go well without an identity governance solution. And M&A presents added risk to the enterprise. Employees already worry about layoffs, and those that do may end up doing things they wouldn't necessarily do. So sometimes groups of users are let go, meaning access needs to be removed immediately. And all that access, all that risk, that all needs to be managed throughout the process. And into our next myth that we often find organizations being a little confused around, and that has to do with access management and identity governance. While access management provides convenience and enhanced productivity with authenticated access, organizations looking to truly establish a secure environment must address identity governance to control and govern each user's access after they've already gained initial access. Identity governance ensures the right resources are accessed at the right times for the right reasons. And without identity governance, organizations are leaving themselves exposed to compromised accounts and, again, insider threats. And as I mentioned before, it is the biggest cause of data breaches. So let me give you an example of how identity is more than just access. Let's say you just hired a new sales rep who needs to have access to Salesforce, the company commission tool, as well as the HR system. And this particular sales rep or person was hired to cover the U.S. West Coast as their territory. So what you really want to have when you bring this person on board is you want to have him gain access to Salesforce, but be restricted to only his territory. There's no need for him to be able to see all the information in Salesforce. So we want him to be able to only see information that pertains to his job, role, responsibility, which is the west part of the U.S. In the same fashion, he should be able to view his commission, but should not be able to calculate them nor approve them to respect the clear separation of duty required by Sarbanes-Oxley regulations. And finally, he should be able to see his pay and his benefits in the company HR system, but he should not be able to process his commission to payroll as much as he probably would like that. So identity governance is more than just granting access. It's about making sure that each person has access to only what they need to do their jobs without causing risk to the organization or even breaching compliance requirements of separation of duties. So identity is more than just managing access. By leveraging identity governance with your access management solution, you can now institute an identity-aware solution or ecosystem that securely and effectively authenticates, provisions, and governs access to all applications and all data across your enterprise, ensuring adherence to corporate policies and security requirements. And by integrating identity governance with your existing access management solution, so for instance, if you're using like Microsoft or Okta or Ping, for instance, you can now automate the governance controls needed to mitigate the risk of a security breach and enforce compliance policies while managing the demands of today's modern workforce. And our last myth is about showing a return on your investment when it comes to identity governance. And this can be easily addressed in both soft and hard costs. First of all, identity governance provides organizations of all sizes the ability to establish a policy-driven approach to automation and self-service. This means that you can feel confident that any access being requested is first validated against your organization's access policies and then fulfilled as policy allows. Areas that organizations typically implement this in includes enabling users to reset their passwords. And according to Forrester, users forget their passwords about 5 times a year. And if those users are required to call a help desk for assistance, and specifically manual assistance, this not only slows down user productivity, because think about if help desk is not up and running or they're gone for the day, but it also can incur costs that stack up really quickly. So consider an average 15-minute help desk call to manually reset a password. On average, will end up costing companies about $30 a call. Depending on your organization size, you can probably do the math pretty quick and estimate an initial return. The next area is by ensuring new hires are productive on day one. It's important that you provision new employees with the appropriate level of access to their systems at the time of hire. And not only will this increase employee productivity and satisfaction, but it will also reduce the costly calls into the help desk. And then there's requesting access. As a new user is coming up to speed, let's say they've just been onboarded and now they're being assigned to different roles or projects, for instance, they may have a need to request access to either another application or a system database or even a file folder where special documents are being stored. So making this available as a self-service capability not only enables them to quickly get going on their work, but also eliminates the need for IT to have to chase down the appropriate application owners to try to determine or figure out if that user really indeed can be granted access. In addition, ensuring access is appropriately adjusted when an employee changes jobs or if they happen to leave the company is super vital to not only securing the organization, but also maintaining compliance. And so by automating this with identity governance, this will help remove the cost involved with, again, those manual processes, but also helps avoid potential cost of compliance fines if access is not completely removed, for instance, upon termination. And finally, it's necessary to perform periodic access reviews to ensure everyone has the right access for their job at that point in time. Typically, without an identity governance solution, this process can be very time-consuming, it can be super arduous, and it can end up being quite expensive when you consider all the man-hours that goes into completing one certification campaign, especially if it's all being done on a spreadsheet. And identity governance provides the means to automate that entire process, enabling business-level managers to quickly respond to the request and compliance to be documented for proof to the auditors. And as an example of the cost savings and the return that can be realized with identity governance, one of our customers, who happens to be a Fortune 500 manufacturer, decided to move away from their legacy identity solution. And they needed to update their processes, and they needed to streamline their efforts so that way that they could improve the experience for their business users. So when they implemented a true identity governance solution, they were able to automate provisioning, and over the course of a year, they were able to handle 62,000 user requests automatically. In total, this saved them $1 million in help desk expenses alone, again, in that first year. And the stories continue on. Here are some other ROI stats that you might find interesting from our customers who have reported that what identity governance has done for them. The example on the left is showing that through automating the deprovisioning of terminating employees, another organization was able to save $800,000 in just 1 year. And on the right, as I mentioned compliance earlier, this next organization was able to slash the time it took to complete the access certification campaign, which originally was 3 months, and took it down to 4 weeks. As digital transformation continues to reshape today's modern enterprise, it's vital that organizations focus on protecting and securing their data, no matter where it resides. I think we can all agree on that. And identity governance provides that fundamental foundation to know who has access to what and how they utilize that access. This provides organizations the ability to move faster, to be more agile, and better address the needs of its employees, its partners, and customers in a secure, compliant, and efficient manner. And because at the end of the day, what every organization is needing to do is ensure that they are able to control and manage access for all their users, all their applications, and all their data, no matter where it resides, meaning if it resides on premises or in the cloud. And as digital transformation can bring on potential challenges that can keep you up at night, it's safe to say that identity governance is able to bring peace of mind to help ensure organizations stay secure and compliant in the most efficient way possible. But even more importantly, identity is a business enabler that opens the door for new opportunities to innovate and to compete. So with that, I'm going to hand this back over to Kirby.
Wonderful. Thank you thank you so much for a wonderful and insightful presentation. I'd like to start our Q&A session. And as a reminder to our audience, you can submit your questions at any time to the Q&A panel. So I'll start first. We have an interesting one. We've been working to ensure that we are addressing GDPR, but we're finding it challenging to know where all of our gaps are, meaning where all potential customer information can be found. Can identity governance help with that?
Okay, that's a good question. And one that I think many other organizations are still in the process of discovering too, because there's a lot that people are learning with this GDPR exercise that we've all been going through. When it comes to GDPR, it's not only about ensuring you're protecting the sensitive customer information that's found like in your applications and your databases, but what we're seeing is that the biggest blind spot for organizations has been all the unstructured data that resides. So these are things, unstructured data meaning, in case you're not familiar with the term, would be things, files that exist outside of your databases, which would be structured data. So all the files such as Word documents, PowerPoints, spreadsheets, PDFs, things like that. And the sensitive information can wind up in these types of docs because as we're typically doing our job and we're needing to create reports and such, we're typically extracting this kind of sensitive data from the protected systems. And now they're naively being stored in these easy-to-get files. So if you can imagine a hacker coming in, it's like, why should I break into that protected database when, oh, here's a file folder that I took this compromised account and now I can go grab all the data that this person has access to. So to answer your question, from a SailPoint standpoint, because I can't represent all identity governance solutions out there, the answer would be yes. Identity governance can assist by going out and, so what you'll find is you can actually go out and crawl all your file stores, and identity governance will be able to help you discover where those pockets of sensitive information reside, and as well as who, more importantly, like who has access to it currently, what are all the different ways that someone can gain access to that. And then not only that, but then lead to the next stop, which is getting to do the cleanup. So you're not living in a world of nested groups and spaghetti access that you can, if you live in the world of Active Directory, you know what I'm talking about. And so once you know what your exposure is, then you can do something about it. And what I mean by that is then you can determine who should have access and then do that cleanup and ensure that you implement that and put policies around it, and then periodically do your certification campaigns to stay clean. So yes, the answer is yes to that question.
Awesome, thanks for the insight. And we have another question in. We've been going through digital transformation for some time and have been adopting cloud apps, cloud storage, and most recently have been moving off our data center and going to AWS. We're trying to find something that can handle all of our new cloud investments, but also still handle some legacy apps that we're not allowed to move to the cloud for compliance reasons. Would we be able to do identity governance in a mixed hybrid environment?
Okay, yeah, and we often see that, especially as people are moving and doing their transformation. You'll have some things that either are going to be moved eventually to the cloud, but they're still staying on-prem, or you may have regulations, like if you're in financial services, for instance, there may be certain applications and systems that have to stay within your, quote, four walls or data center for regulation reasons. But again, I'll answer this from a SailPoint point of view. So if I understand the question correctly, you're wanting to control access to all the new resources, all the new cloud applications and such, as well as the old, I don't want to call it old, but the existing and legacy resources. So the answer to that is yes. A modern solution, meaning one that is looking at a hybrid environment today, a modern identity solution should be able to do exactly what you're talking about. And that is being able to enforce those access policies so that access can be controlled to all those applications, and also file storage, including cloud storage, for instance, no matter if it's in the cloud or still on-prem. And really, regardless if you're using an identity solution from the cloud or hosted on-prem or on-premises, you should be able to manage that hybrid environment no matter what. So again, I would say the answer is yes, but if you need to go a little bit deeper into your question, please submit a second one. Back to you, Kirby.
Sounds good. you mentioned that identity should be considered as security. I'm curious how this works in conjunction with my other security tools I have in place, such as our Splunk implementation.
Okay, yes, of course. Identity does show up again as a key security component, and one of which I didn't cover in today's presentation, but let me see if I can answer this. So, because if you think about it, your identity governance solution has to keep track of your users, their roles, their permissions and entitlements, access history, and all other meaningful information like that. So all of that rich information that an identity governance solution will collect, we refer to that as identity context. And we really see that as kind of digital gold. It's the gold when it comes to securing your infrastructure. And how that is realized is that identity information or that context that we collect, you can then share that out with other resources. You mentioned you had Splunk, for instance, but if you had ArcSight or some of these other SIMs, you could actually share that information out. And the reason why that's valuable is because when event details are coming through Splunk, for instance, the event data now can be enriched, so to give you more context to the event, meaning an actual, instead of like a user 9XYW3Y2 would then be translated in the event as maybe with a first and last name and the title of that person or user and the department. So if you think about it, if you have that type of information attached to the event, then that can help a security analyst to determine if the event is really suspicious or if it's not. And that is just one example. You really can share this with all your IT and security resources. And when you do, you can imagine this identity web, if you will, that creates this tighter ecosystem with information being shared to and from the identity governance platform. So it's something we call, when you establish something like that, when it's all interconnected and you're sharing information, we refer to that as an identity-aware ecosystem. So if you think about it, you get kind of a two-prong approach to managing your infrastructure. So the first one is what we just covered in the webcast today is really about governing and controlling access for all the users, the applications, and the data. But then second of all, you take all of that identity information you collect, and as a byproduct, you can then share that out with your other investments to tighten up your security efforts. I hope that helped. Back to you, Kirby.
Thanks. I think that's all the time that we actually have for today. And as a reminder, we'll be sending out a recorded version of the webinar as well as the relevant asset in the next coming days. So if you have any questions at any time, feel free to reach out to sales@sailpoint.com, and we will get you in touch with an identity expert. Jacqueline, thank you for your time, and thank everyone for tuning in today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.